Hmm. Can you tell me a little bit more about hyphae and their role in the organism? I mean, in particular, like what makes them unique, say, from the roots of plants?
That's a great question, because indeed they're actually, one thing is that fungal hyphae are tip growing. The only way that predominantly they grow, they extend at their tips, and that's how they elongate. Now we're talking about growth on the order of what, a few millimeters a day. This isn't a very fast rate of growth. It's actually a pretty good clip for a microorganism. But there's other kinds of tip growing cells that we find, like pollen tubes, that are involved in sexual reproduction, that deliver the sperm cells in plant reproduction. And there's other kinds of cells that also grow at their tips. And so what makes a fungal hypha a unique structure is the fact that it combines that tip growth with feeding. And so a pollen tube isn't really doing that. A pollen tube is growing inside a plant flower. It's delivering the male gametes, the sperm cells, to the eggs in the flower, but it's not really a feeding structure. Fungal hyphae are feeding structures. They're penetrating solid materials. Well, there could be our own tissues, and I write about a lot about that in the new book. But it could be wood. We talked about rolling over a log. Well, they're feeding on plant debris in that case. But yes, that combination of tip growth and feeding. And the feeding happens in the following way: that these hyphae, these filaments, they release enzymes from the tips of the cells. Those enzymes break down macromolecules, so complex carbohydrates, but also proteins and fat molecules. And the action of those enzymes really releases smaller molecules from those polymers, those larger molecules, and then the fungus feeds on them. So it's feeding on sugars, for example, that fuel its metabolism. So it's doing this continuously. It's releasing enzymes, breaking down large molecules in its surroundings, absorbing low molecular weight things like sugars and fatty acids and amino acids, and it's using these to actually fuel its metabolism. So there are some other organisms, some other microorganisms that work in a similar fashion. Water molds do this. It's a kind of protist. But that really it's the best shot I've got there at explaining what makes a fungal hypha different from most other things. But it's got some, in terms of the cellular makeup of that structure, there's some very distinctive features of the structure of a hypha, and also the thing's pressurized. Many years ago now, that was one of the research areas that I explored, was actually measuring the pressure inside fungal cells. It was just, for me at least, it was fantastically interesting that we could actually measure the pressure of those cells directly by puncturing them with a glass micropipette, a little tube, and actually measuring the pressure inside those cells. And they're pressurized to a few atmospheres of pressure. 4, 5, 6 atmospheres of pressure, which means if a fungal hypha is damaged while it's growing, it'll explode. Although it also possesses what I suppose a simple form of clotting mechanism that actually prevents the cell from hemorrhaging, from the whole mycelium from hemorrhaging. But yeah, it's under pressure. And that's interesting. The individual cells in our bodies are not under pressure. We have blood pressure, but these pressures in fungal hyphae are much higher than those, 10 times higher than human blood pressure. And so, they spurt their contents if they're damaged. What else about hyphae? The other thing is that they branch highly. Pollen tubes don't do that, other tip growing cells. So as a hypha extends, it forms branches, and the branches branch, and that's how you get this very complex, geometrically complex, three-dimensional network of filaments, and that's the feeding phase of the fungus.
And root structures of plants, although they on a macroscopic level have a similar kind of like winding networking thing, they're serving an entirely different function to the organism. From what I understand, the mycelium, that is the organism, And the
Right.
fruit, the mushroom is the fruiting body, where with trees, the
So
tree is
that's
the whole organism. The root is a part of its feeding, but it's not
yeah,
the whole
it's a great.
organism.
That's a good observation. So that actually distinguishes the fungi from plants, or the following distinguishes the fungi from the plants is that fungi are absorbing food from their surroundings. Plants are making their own food, right? They use the energy, solar energy, to manufacture, well, to fix carbon dioxide and their manufacture sugars and other macromolecules. So plants make their own food. Fungi steal from plants and actually other fungi, and then also from us and other organisms on which they grow. The root system of plants is absorbing water and minerals, but it's not, I wouldn't, we wouldn't, if we're using feeding in terms of actually a carbon source, something that we can burn, that comes from the leaves and the photosynthetic activity of the plant.
Hmm.
Whereas the fungi have to absorb all of their food through their, you know, I mean, we refer to it sometimes as, or people have referred to it sometimes as the fungal equivalent of a root system. Well, not so much. It is in terms, as you said, of its sort of some of its three-dimensional structure that through forming very fine filaments, it's able to explore a very large volume. Well, that's exactly what fungi are doing when they penetrate wood, for example.